Running commentary. We are exploring listening to albums. It is a lost art form. The Smiths, The Queen is Dead. We have invited Neil Barker from Pop Scene from Manchester in the UK to counterpoint our reviews. The Queen is Dead was released in June of 1986 on Rough Trade Records. A jangle rock is the name that is given to this music, coming from Manchester. If there was an embryo, it would probably be the Smiths and Cure on one side with U2 splitting off on the other direction. My relationship with the Smiths has been a contentious thing from the past when I said that Morrissey should have been drowned at birth and received a sackload of hate mail from the Smash Hits readers. I have been made to eat humble pie and do realise that I'm probably closer to Morrissey in character than I'd like to admit. In fact, I'm quite proud to admit at this point that Morrissey is indeed a lyrical genius. From my opinion, Morrissey in the early days came across as a disconsolate youth, somebody that was never happy and whined and whinged. Here on The Queen is Dead, however, there is a settling down, there is an acceptance of one's character. There is a feeling of connecting with the romantic nature of one's character and the hopelessness of that. The lyrics now are much more sensible and far more amusing, a lot less forlorn and much more in keeping with observations of coming from a detached or a row housing in Manchester. If you look at the house that Morrissey grew up in, it's a very, very modest home. So this is not going to be a review where I put down Morrissey or attack the Smiths, but I will say that I don't think that their singles were the best representation of their work. Big Mouth Strikes Again annoys the crap out of me. I can't stand the high-pitched speeding up of Morrissey's voice. I do find the backing vocalist reference of Ancoats extremely amusing. I do like the humour of that, but the song itself just annoys me. I don't understand what's it about. Big Mouth Strikes Again, The Queen is Dead, Meat is Murder. Shut up already. The difference is that when he draws you in on the album, I should say they, because for me, Morrissey is a huge draw. He is somebody that really does, once you find your place with him, draws you in and really makes you listen and makes you smile, and makes you smile in a wry way and makes you understand that you probably live a very similar life to him, whether you want to admit it or not. One of my favourite quotes that Morrissey ever made was when he was on the Jonathan Ross show, and he said that he really didn't like people very much, and when Jonathan Ross asked to be his friend, Morrissey said flatly, no. So the album starts out with this kind of piano hall chant. They're sort of like singing like old ladies would in a bingo hall, and it's all very endearing, and it sort of reminds me of my grandmother and that kind of pre-war, post-war era, sort of Second World War kind of style sing-alongs that they do to get through the blitzes. I like The Queen is Dead, and immediately the maturity is what strikes me about this album on its initial entrance. The lyrics are far more humorous. By the second track, Frankly Mr. Shankly, this is just great. I love the intonation, this sort of preponderous and much more measured sort of Mr. Shankly. It's very kind of the alliteration and the way he addresses his words here corrodes my soul. I've got the 21st century breathing down my neck. Morrissey, you've no idea. It's actually here, and it's probably just about the worst thing ever. Bloody awful poetry. I'm getting sort of hints here of New Order and Joy Division. There's a sort of feeling of heritage. He doesn't seem in control of his situation. He seems like a victim, but here on track 3, no, he's in control of what's happening here on I Know It's Over. So initially, the album is really striking me as a major development in their career. They're very, very comfortable with who they are. I don't know that they really care at this point what other people think of them. I don't know that they need to. You know, clearly Johnny Marr is in the pocket with his guitar. He doesn't need anyone to tell him that he's a great guitarist. He is just one of the best guitarists. He absolutely inhabits this band, and I've never had a problem with Johnny Marr. Not ever. I've never had anything bad to say about his work. I think How Soon Is Now is one of the best guitar solos of all time. I think it absolutely defines that sort of post-coal miner strike 80s thing that they did so well. And I'm going to stop talking for a bit. But this will give you a great entrance, Neil. Talk to us about these first 3 tracks and the album.
Right, well, the album, I mean, I bought it, I was a massive Smiths fan at the time. I'd been buying their records since What Difference Does It Make? The 3rd single in 1984. So I was always looking forward to any new releases from the Smiths. And it's one of those where, at the time, I think I was slightly disappointed by the second album, Meat Is Murder. So for me, this album was an improvement. But looking back and after listening to it again, it sort of occurred to me that The Queen Is Dead is actually my least favourite Smiths album. And this is only because there are maybe 2 or 3 tracks which I don't think really stand up and as great tracks, and they don't make the album seem as complete as maybe the other albums do. And so you're saying about, so we obviously start with the title track. It starts with the actress Cicely Courtnidge singing "Take Me Back to Dear Old Blighty," which is a strange kind of opener. It's not something you expect really from. I mean, looking back, you probably think it is the sort of thing Morrissey would put in a, but you know, perhaps not as an album opener. And that intrigued me at the time because I sort of wanted to know what the rest of that sounded like, because it sort of cuts off as the song kicks in with Mike Joyce's drums. And yeah, it's a great opener. I mean, it's perhaps a bit overlong, at 6.5 minutes. I think, although I do believe originally it was a 13-minute track. So some of Johnny Marr's best guitar work on that track, I think, up to that point. Frankly, Mr. Shankly, I've never been that fond of, to be honest with you. I think at the time I thought, oh, that's quite a jolly song, but that's one of the tracks that sort of spoils the album a little bit for me. It's very jaunty and great lyrics. I mean, apparently it was written about Jeff Travis, who was the head of Rough Trade Records. And the line about bloody awful poetry is a reference to him, because apparently he wrote a poem which he showed to Morrissey, and Morrissey just laughed at it and said it was pathetic. So that's supposed to be a reference to that. And I also heard that Linda McCartney was asked to come and play piano on that track, but she politely declined. I Know It's Over. Now, this is a track that I know a lot of people regard as the best track on the album. I'm not so sure. I've always had mixed feelings about it. I like the way it starts, straight in with the vocals, Mother, I Can Feel the Soil Falling Over My Head. As the song progresses, Morrissey's voice towards the end, and it's one of the few times I'd say this, because as I say, I do get annoyed with people who just say he's miserable and moans. It just sort of grates a bit, gets a bit repetitive towards the end, goes slightly out of tune, which could have been intentional, knowing Morrissey, but it's one of, I just can't make my mind up whether I like it. And then, as I've been listening to the album again, the tune, especially the intro, keeps running through my head all the time. So I think, well, maybe I do like it. You know, I just can't sort of make my mind up. But I don't think it's one of the best tracks.
We move on to 4, which is Never Had No One Ever. And what I've written down here is that this is great heroin music. This, to me, is you tap a vein, put some good skag in it, and listen to this song. I like it. I'm not against it. It reminds me of sort of nodding out. And poetry is a big theme on this album, and death is a big theme on this album, and death and poetry often collide. We've talked about Big Mouth Strikes Again. It's the neck now. That is what annoys me. I can't stand it. I absolutely cannot stand hearing that sped up version. Is it a child? What is that noise? Like every time it comes on, the single drives me absolutely batshit crazy.
Never Had No One Ever. It's probably one of my least favourite tracks on the album, this. I always see it as a bit of filler. Not one I used to sort of go back to at the time. I tended to skip it back in 1986. Apparently it's about Morrissey not feeling at ease in his hometown of Manchester. And yeah, there's not a great deal to say about it. I know Johnny Marr has said that when he listened back to it after many years, he was surprised at how good it was, because he'd forgotten, he'd not really sort of thought about it for years. Cemetery Gates, on the other hand, I think is fantastic. I think that's one of the best Smith songs. One I used to go back to a lot at the time. I used to sort of single out that track, and I mean, it probably could have been a single. It ended up on the B-side of Ask, which was a single at the end of that year, and the Smiths tended to do that because they didn't want to take too many singles off an album. They'd bring a new track out as an A-side and put an album track on the B-side, but often as a result of that, the B-side would end up being better because it was a great track off the album. So I don't know if that necessarily worked, but I suppose it was a way of an audience that had not bought the album. It was a good advert for the album, I suppose, and they could go back and buy that. Great lyrics, great guitar from Johnny Marr, great input from everybody really involved. It's not necessarily my favourite Smiths album, but I think this is, it does contain some of their best songs and some of Morrissey's best songwriting up to that point. Big Mouth Strikes Again. I think it's a good track. Not necessarily the best single. I think it's one of their most popular singles. It still seems to get played a fair bit on sort of alternative radio. And the speeded up vocal in the chorus is a bit of an odd one. I believe originally Kirsty MacColl was asked to do the backing vocals on it, and she did sing on other Smith songs such as Ask. So I'm not sure why she didn't end up doing that, but they ended up speeding up Morrissey's voice and using that as the backing vocal. It's credited to Anne Coates, which is obviously a pun on Anne Coates, a district of Manchester. But yeah, it's got I think it kind of spoils the song slightly. I think maybe with Kirsty MacColl on backing vocals or another female singer, it might have actually sounded better. But I think it's a song that still stands up really to this day. Probably deserved to get higher than 26. Considering the Smiths did have such a big fan base, it was surprising the chart positions were quite low. It's an interesting one, this, because to begin with, there's a bit of a family connection. Because my auntie and uncle knew Morrissey. They lived in Stretford. I mean, when I say auntie and uncle, I mean they were only in their early 20s or something. We're talking sort of late 70s, early 80s. So they knew, like, Morrissey was quite not well known, but he was, most people who were into the sort of bands they were listening to, New York Dolls, early Japan, when Japan was still a kind of glam sort of act. There was like a circle of friends who were all into them. Morrissey was part of that circle of friends, so they'd go around to one another's houses and go to parties together and stuff like that. So I never met him, but in the intervening years, I think around 83-ish, I started hearing about this Steve Morrissey, my auntie, and I just thought, he's just a friend of my auntie's. And then it's like, oh, he's got this band, and I didn't really think much of it. And then eventually it was, he's got a record coming out, it's going to be on Top of the Pops. And before you know it, it's all happening quite quickly. And then there's this group on Top of the Pops fronted by this friend of my auntie's and uncle's, although they never saw him once he made it big. And they didn't see him again.
Continuing with the tracks on the album, The Boy with the Fawn on His Side, which featured Truman Capote as a young man on the cover. This was a number 23 hit in 1985. It's not one of those songs that really matters to me too much, but I've really got nothing against it. Vicar in a Tutu, which talks about lifting the lead off of some church roof somewhere, which I think is, the kind of scallywaggish behaviour which Morrissey refers to so well, and this is where I'm starting to really relate to him. It's just very, very interesting. His observations on human nature are fascinating. I have to say though, at the end of this track for Vicar in a Tutu, the wailing becomes just absolutely wretched. I simply cannot hear another bar of him. It's like, please stop. There is a light that never goes out. It really is just this incredible song. Both the 10-ton truck kills both of us. I don't know that I'd be happier is essentially the sentiment here, and I think he really got a handle on who he was, who the band were, and what his identity were in this song. I know that this is a song that is popular with a lot of people. It may seem a really obvious choice, but I think that he strikes his absolute perfection here. I think he really gets who he is and where he is and what he's doing. And for the first time, he just, not once during this song does he annoy me or irritate me. He just seems to be coming from a different place. It really seems quite inspired, as opposed to self-loathing, which is the other thing with Morrissey, which can sometimes be a real drag, is this sort of self-loathing, which explains, I guess, why a lot of kind of younger guys might really relate to him as this sort of self-effacing person or character that says, I'm really crap, or I'm spotty, or, you know, I've got a big nose, or whatever it is. I think this is why Morrissey worked so well with the youth of the 80s, because he wasn't someone who was a flashy pop star. He was this guy with a bunch of flowers and a very average kind of wardrobe with the sort of flowing shirt and the jeans. Somebody who was very approachable. And it's amazing, really, when you think about that. And the more I talk about him, the more I respect him. It's interesting how a character that I absolutely not despised, I think that's a hard word, it was just a nuisance. He was just somebody that irritated me like an insect buzzing around a light bulb. There's something about this song which just changes everything for me, and really scores this album big marks here on track 9. And track 10, Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others. Just genius. It's just, I love it. It's a great way to end this record. They're having fun, it's tongue-in-cheek, you know, of course the girls go up in arms about this, of course they do. Morrissey doesn't give a rat's ass. This song is fun, it's saucy, and he does this so well, and Johnny Marr's right there with him with the strum of the guitar, and it's just, they're in the pocket. The magic is here on these last 2 tracks.
Okay, Boy with the Thorn in His Side. I think that's one of their best singles. I remember when it came out, it sort of followed a period in the Smiths' career where it seemed like they were faltering a bit. I mean, Shakespeare's Sister was, I think, probably their weakest single, and obviously you only got to, I think, 28, was it?
29, something like that, yeah.
Followed by That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, which I don't think ever should have been a single. I mean, it was a good album track on Meet Is Murder, but it was a surprise single because it was following a non-album single. So that was no surprise that didn't go top 40. So I remember around and thinking, oh, is it all over for the Smiths? But then they came back with Boy with the Thorn in His Side, which I thought was, you know, a real return to form. Probably the most polished sounding single they've done up to that point, and that might be to do with Johnny Marr's use of more sort of acoustic guitars in that. Also, it's the first time the Smiths had ever agreed to make a video for a single, which is something they'd always flatly refused, apart from, you know, obviously they appeared on Top of the Pops, but they would never make a video, so they kind of finally reluctantly agreed to make a video for that, so it could be shown on other programs. I don't know whether it really belongs on The Queen Is Dead, because by the time that album came out, I mean, the song's, you know, quite a few months old, but the album was delayed anyway. It was supposed to come out earlier in the year, but there was some legal difficulties between them and Rough Trade. Vicar in a Tutu is another one of those tracks that puts me off slightly. It's kind of, it shuffles along, it's got a nice sort of rockabilly feel to it. I know Morrissey was inspired by quite a few sort of rockabilly artists, sort of got quite amusing lyrics again, and apparently it's about not being accepted in society. Name checks the Holy Name Church, which is an actual church in Manchester. I'm fine with Morrissey's voice most of the time on these songs. This track ended up on the B-side of Panic, but I think in that case the A-side was the better of the two. And I'm not sure if listeners playing Vicar in a Tutu would have endeared them to this album, possibly. Then we come to There Is a Light That Never Goes Out, which I think is an absolute classic. It was always a standout track for me when I bought the album. Sort of great lyrics, I mean strange lyrics, not the sort of lyrics you expect in a pop song, the 10-ton truck killing the both of us, etc. But I think it's some great instrumentation. There's some strings. I really like the strings towards the end, which I didn't realise for some reason they're actually synthesised strings. which Morrissey had to be persuaded to put on because he didn't sort of like the idea of using synthesised strings. But I think they were sort of low on funds, the band, so they couldn't afford a proper orchestra. So finally agreed to that. But yeah, that still stands up. I think that scene. I know a lot of people think I Know It's Over is the best track on the album. I think There Is a Light is also seen as one of the standout tracks. And I mean, it really should have been a single at the time, but I believe that the band wanted to hold it back. They didn't want too many singles coming off albums, and they also liked the idea of having at least one track on each album which they knew that everybody loved and wanted as a single, but they wanted to keep it as an album track. But obviously in later years it did come out as a single and did become a top 30 hit. Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others I just see as filler again. It's great jangly guitar playing from Johnny Marr again, and quite an intriguing intro. I never sort of knew whether that was a mistake, the way it kind of comes in, fades down very quickly and then fades back up again. I was never quite sure if that was just an accident in the studio and they just left it in. It's a bit throwaway. I mean, I'm sure Morrissey was being very tongue-in-cheek with the lyrics, and he sort of knew it wasn't going to be heralded as one of his sort of classics in songwriting terms, but I think it probably belonged more as on a B-side, although it was considered good enough to be a single in Germany, which sort of baffles me, to be honest with you, given the choice of the other tracks. But there you go.
My final score for the Smiths, The Queen Is Dead, is 79%.
You know, I still think it's a great album. I don't think the Smiths ever made a really bad record. So I'm going to give it 85%.
Okay, so we're kind of close there. So yep. 79 and 85 puts us at 164, making the overall mark 82%. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, recommend it to friends, post comments. Also, if you have an album that you'd like to hear reviewed, we welcome your requests.